The Zaxtheri observation ship hung silently above Earth's atmosphere, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it invisible to human detection systems. Commander Vextel stood on the bridge, his scaled fingers drumming against the crystalline control panel as he studied the night side of the planet below. Another primitive world, he muttered, his secondary breathing slits flaring with contempt. Run the final bioscans before we begin collection. The ship's artificial intelligence compiled data from a week of surveillance. Humans, bipedal mammals, tool users, limited space travel capabilities, no unified planetary government. Primitive by any galactic standard. Perfect for the fighting pits. Sir, his second-in-command, Crittle, reported, we've identified 30 suitable specimens across their North American continent. Their isolation patterns match our collection parameters. Vextel's lips curled into what passed for a smile among his species. Begin the extraction. Standard protocol. No witnesses, no traces. The first beam struck in Virginia. Jake Morrison was running his usual midnight trail behind the Quantico Marine Corps base, his mind occupied with tomorrow's close combat training session. The ex-Navy SEAL never saw the purple light that enveloped him. One moment, he was calculating proper knife-fighting stances. The next, his world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colors. In Seattle, Madison Mad Max Cooper was setting up her camera for a nighttime parkour run. Her YouTube followers had been begging for more extreme content, and the abandoned warehouse district offered perfect urban climbing opportunities. The purple beam caught her mid-leap between buildings, her GoPro capturing nothing but static. Dr. Ashley Williams was working late in her Denver laboratory, running final tests on a new polymer designed for military body armor. She noticed the strange purple glow reflecting off her beakers just seconds before everything went dark. Her last conscious action was to knock over a rack of test tubes, ensuring evidence of a struggle. Mike Grizzly Thompson was deeper in the Colorado wilderness, teaching a night survival course to wealthy clients. The purple beam took him and 3 of his students while they practiced fire-starting techniques. The remaining embers of their camp would puzzle search and rescue teams for weeks. The collection continued across the country. A rodeo champion in Texas, a competitive lockpicker in New York, a chess grandmaster in Chicago. Each target carefully selected, each extraction perfectly executed. When consciousness returned, Jake Morrison found himself in a transparent cell, surrounded by similar enclosures containing the other abductees. His SEAL training kicked in immediately. Assess, analyze, survive. The cell was roughly 15 feet square, with a strange shimming barrier instead of bars. The air had a metallic taste, and the gravity felt slightly off. "Everyone stay calm," he called out, his voice carrying to the nearby cells. "Sound off if you can hear me. Name and occupation." Madison Cooper, professional parkour athlete, came a response from his right. She was already testing the corners of her cell, moving with calculated precision. Dr. Ashley Williams, chemical engineer, echoed from the left. She was studying the barrier with intense concentration, her fingers making small movements as if taking invisible notes. Mike Thompson, survival specialist, rumbled from across the corridor. The burly instructor was systematically checking every inch of his cell floor. More voices joined in, each revealing backgrounds that seemed randomly diverse on the surface. But Jake's trained mind was already seeing patterns: athletes, specialists, problem solvers. Either their abductors were incredibly smart in their selection, or they had no idea they'd just collected some of humanity's most adaptable individuals. The ship's monitoring AI flagged the prisoners' organized communication to Commander Vextel, who watched the exchanges with amusement. "Look at them, Cortal," he chuckled, already establishing a primitive hierarchy. "These mammals will make excellent entertainment in the lower-tier fighting pits." Cortal nodded in agreement, but something in the prisoner's methodical movements gave him pause. He pushed the concern aside. After all, what harm could primitive beings possibly pose to an advanced civilization? In his cell, Jake Morrison allowed himself a small smile. The aliens had made their first mistake. They were watching, but they weren't observing. And if there's one thing Navy SEALs excelled at, it was making enemies regret their assumptions. The Zaxtheres evaluation lab resembled a twisted hybrid of a medical bay and a gladiatorial staging area. Commander Vextal observed from behind a force field as his scientists conducted their standard species assessment protocols on their newest acquisitions. Subject shows elevated stress responses, noted the chief examiner, monitoring Jake Morrison's vital signs as he completed their physical capability test. The ex-SEAL was running on a strange treadmill-like device, its surface shifting unpredictably beneath his feet. What the aliens registered as stress, however, was actually controlled breathing. Jake counted his steps, mapped the pattern of surface changes, and memorized every detail of the testing chamber. 23 steps to the main door, 2 guard stations, 3 different types of weapons on the guard's utility belts. In the adjacent chamber, Madison Cooper was undergoing reflex testing. Purple energy bolts shot from wall-mounted projectors, which she was expected to dodge. The Zaxtheres scientists clicked their approval as she stumbled and barely avoided several shots. Remarkable agility for a primitive, one noted, but poor spatial awareness. They didn't notice that each of Madison's clumsy moves brought her closer to examining the projector's mounting mechanisms. Her Parker-trained mind was already calculating angles, load-bearing points, and potential handholds across the chamber's entire surface. Dr. Ashley Williams proved particularly amusing to her captors during chemical sensitivity testing. They exposed her to various atmospheric changes, watching her exaggerated coughing fits with clinical detachment. None of them recognized that each cough was carefully timed, allowing her to taste and analyze the different compounds in the air. Their respiratory systems are quite fragile, the examiner logged. Recommend low-intensity combat scenarios only. Ashley suppressed a smile. She'd already identified 3 gases she could replicate using materials from their cell's waste reclamation units. Mike Thompson's evaluation was perhaps the most revealing. The survival expert was presented with various alien tools and observed to see how he would interact with them. Subject demonstrates primitive tool recognition. The scientists noted as Mike fumbled with what appeared to be a simple cutting device. Limited problem-solving capabilities. Meanwhile, Mike was categorizing each tool by its potential as a weapon or escape aid. The cutting tool's power cell alone could be repurposed for at least 3 different uses. Between tests, the humans were returned to their cells, where the real work began. Jake initiated what appeared to be a simple exercise routine. Jumping jacks, push-ups, stretches. The guards found it amusing, but each movement was a coded message to the other prisoners. "They're testing us individually," Jake signaled through a series of stretches. "They don't expect cooperation." Madison responded with her own exercise routine, her movements conveying information about the testing chamber's layout. Ashley used a series of yoga poses to share her findings about the ship's atmosphere composition. Mike's calisthenics detailed the tools he'd examined. The chess grandmaster, Dr. Robert Chen, watched everything from his cell, his mind calculating probabilities and patterns. Even the rodeo champion, Billy Tucker, contributed by demonstrating how the aliens' restraint techniques could be countered using his knowledge of livestock handling. Fascinating social behavior, Kratal observed, watching the prisoners' exercise sessions. They seek comfort in mimicking each other's movements. Vextal barely glanced at the surveillance feeds. Typical herd mentality. Have the combat assessment teams prepared their report? Yes, Commander. They're classified as Class D combatants, suitable only for novice entertainment matches. Their physical capabilities are unremarkable, and they show no signs of advanced tactical thinking. In his cell, Jake Morrison completed his exercise routine with a series of shoulder rolls that actually meant, "They think we're stupid." Good. The humans continued their performance of primitive confusion and stress, all while building an intricate web of communication and preparation. Every test designed to evaluate their weaknesses instead revealed the ship's vulnerabilities. Every observation session meant to document their limitations became an opportunity to study their captors. The Zaxtheri had expected to find test subjects. Instead, they'd created a laboratory for human ingenuity, and their experiment was about to exceed all parameters. The accident, when it happened, appeared perfectly natural. Dr. Ashley Williams tripped while carrying her food ration, sending the gelatinous substance splattering against her cell's force field. The guards barely glanced up from their stations. After all, such clumsiness was expected from primitive species. What they didn't notice was the slight fluctuation in the force field's purple hue where the food made contact, or Ashley's eyes narrowing as she observed the reaction. Most unfortunate, she mumbled loudly, making a show of trying to clean up the mess with her sleeve. Her seemingly random swipes actually traced the pattern of energy fluctuations across the barrier surface. In his cell, Jake Morrison stepped up his exercise routine, the increased activity masking his whispered conversation with Mike Thompson in the adjacent cell. "Did you see that ripple?" Jake's voice was barely audible over his controlled breathing. "Yeah," Mike responded between push-ups. "Same color shift we saw in the hydroponic bay when they were adjusting the atmospheric controls." Madison Cooper chose that moment to launch into one of her panic attacks, a performance that had become familiar to their captors over the past days. Her hyperventilation and pacing masked the sound of their conversation, while allowing her to test different sections of her cell's floor plating. "These aliens sure love their patterns," she gasped between exaggerated breaths, her movements conveying additional information to her fellow prisoners. 3 taps of her foot. She'd found a loose panel. 4 quick steps. The ventilation system above had a regular cleaning cycle. The chess grandmaster, Dr. Robert Chen, sat in his cell with his eyes closed, apparently meditating. In reality, he was mentally mapping every guard rotation, every shift change, every subtle pattern in the ship's daily operations. His fingers twitched occasionally, each movement a coded observation shared with the others. "Sir," Kratal addressed Commander Vextall on the bridge, "I've noticed some concerning patterns in the human subject's behavior." Vextall's secondary breathing slits flared in annoyance. "More of your paranoia, Kratal. The chemical engineer's accident. It's the 3rd time this week the human has spilled food near the force field generators. And their stress behaviors seem coordinated. They're pack animals, Kratal. Of course their behaviors are similar." Vextall dismissed the concern with a wave of his scaled hand. "Have you reviewed their combat training progress?" In the training arena, Billy Tucker was putting on a magnificent show of incompetence with alien weapons. The rodeo champion fumbled with a neural whip, apparently unable to grasp its basic operation. None of the observers noticed how his accidents were systematically testing the weapon's response times and power settings. "They're progressing exactly as expected for their classification," Kratal admitted. "Minimal combat effectiveness, poor weapons adaptation." Back in the cells, Ashley had begun what appeared to be a religious ritual, drawing patterns on the floor with the remains of her spilled food. The guards, briefed on respecting primitive cultural practices, ignored her. They didn't realize she was creating a chemical formula, using the food's reaction with the floor plating to test different molecular combinations. Madison's latest exploration of her cell had revealed a crucial weakness in the ventilation system's junction points. Mike had identified 3 different toxic plants in the hydroponic bay that could be processed into primitive but effective weapons. Jake had compiled a mental catalog of every guard's personal combat style and equipment preferences. Dr. Chen finished another meditation session, having completed his analysis of the ship's duty roster patterns. He'd identified a critical gap in coverage during shift changes, a gap that lasted exactly 2.3 minutes. "Primitive species are so fascinating," one of the scientific observers commented, watching the humans go through their various stress response behaviors. "Look how they seek comfort in repetitive actions." If they'd looked closer, they might have seen the predatory glint in Jake Morrison's eyes as he continued his exercises. Each movement now was a rehearsal, each repetition a preparation. The humans weren't breaking under captivity. They were sharpening themselves into weapons. The Zaxthery's greatest mistake wasn't in underestimating human intelligence. It was in giving their captives time to think, space to plan, and the assumption of weakness to hide behind. The Zaxthery Medical Bay's chief examiner was puzzled by the readings on his screen. Subject Jake Morrison's vital signs showed elevated levels of stress hormones, yet the human maintained perfect composure during combat training. The examiner made a note to study this apparent contradiction, unaware that Jake was intentionally controlling his biochemical responses, a technique learned during SEAL training. Remarkable adaptability for a primitive species, the examiner muttered, but still within expected parameters. What the examiner didn't see was how Jake used each mandatory medical examination to map the medical bay's layout, counting steps between diagnostic machines, noting emergency protocols posted on walls and alien script that Dr. Chen had partially decoded during his meditation sessions. In the hydroponics section, Mike Thompson had graduated from basic maintenance to tending the more delicate alien flora. His apparent attachment to the plants amused the agricultural supervisors. "They're like children discovering photosynthesis," one supervisor commented as Mike carefully pruned a violet-leafed specimen. They missed how he was systematically testing each plant's properties, carefully collecting samples of the most toxic varieties in the hollow heel of his ship-issued boots. The collection now included 3 neurotoxins, 2 paralytics, and 1 particularly nasty hallucinogen. Madison Cooper's parkour skills had earned her the job of cleaning the ship's higher maintenance areas. The Zaxthery appreciated her agility, but laughed at her occasional slips and falls. "Watch this one." A guard chuckled as Madison stumbled near a ventilation shaft. "They're like primate younglings, always trying to climb." The guard never noticed that each slip allowed Madison to test different handholds, mapping a 3-dimensional route through the ship's maintenance systems. Her apparent clumsiness had given her access to 12 different levels and knowledge of every security blind spot. Dr. Ashley Williams had turned her cell into what the aliens assumed was a shrine, covered in mysterious symbols drawn with various substances from her needles. The guards, instructed to respect primitive religious practices, never interfered. "Such fascinating ritualistic behavior," noted the cultural specialist. The shrine was actually a complex chemical formula. Ashley had discovered that combining cleaning compounds with mineral deposits from their water supply created a substance that could temporarily disrupt the force fields. She kept the final catalyst hidden in plain sight, a religious token made from compressed food rations. In his cell, Dr. Chen sat in his usual meditation pose, but his mind was assembling all the pieces. Madison's mapping data, communicated through exercise routines. Mike's botanical weapons, conveyed through casual mealtime conversations. Ashley's chemical breakthroughs, shared through apparent prayer meetings. Jake's tactical analysis, transmitted during group exercise periods. Billy Tucker had perhaps the most brilliant cover of all. His reputation as the friendly, talkative cowboy had led the guards to dismiss him as simple-minded. They freely discussed security protocols in front of him, assuming he couldn't understand their significance. "You folks sure run a tight ship," he'd drawl, seemingly making innocent conversation, while mentally recording every detail. The final piece clicked into place during evening meal distribution. A new guard, more careless than the others, wore his neural whip on the left instead of the right. Dr. Chen's fingers twitched, a coded message to the others. This guard's break from standard procedure would create a 1.7-second delay in quick draw response time. "Have you reviewed the latest behavioral assessments?" Commander Vextall asked Krital on the bridge. "Yes, sir. All subjects show appropriate signs of submission and adaptation to captivity. They've accepted their roles and display no signs of resistance." Krital hesitated, then added, "Though I still find their group behavior patterns unusual." "Your concerns are noted, Krital, but the evidence is clear. They're precisely what we expected, primitive beings adapting to superior authority." In his cell, Jake Morrison completed his evening exercise routine with a precise set of movements that communicated the final go-ahead to the others. Everything was in place. The humans had built their web carefully, each strand invisible to their captor's eyes, each piece appearing harmless in isolation. The Zaxtheri had created their own defeat by assuming that human adaptation meant submission. They never considered that adaptation could be a weapon, and the humans had adapted their entire ship into an arsenal. The ship's artificial night cycle was in full effect when Ashley Williams began her evening prayers. The guards barely glanced at the ritual they'd seen dozens of times before. Tonight, however, her whispered words weren't prayers. They were a countdown. Our Father, who art in heaven. 10 minutes to shift change. In the hydroponic bay, the first signs of Mike Thompson's work began to manifest. 3 Zaxtheri guards suddenly doubled over, their scales taking on a sickly green tinge. The modified plants he'd been cultivating had finally released their spores into the ship's air filtration system. Medical emergency in Section 7, the ship's AI announced dispassionately. Hallowed be thy name. 8 minutes. Madison Cooper rolled restlessly in her sleep, a common sight for the guards who'd watched her struggle with insomnia. Her hand slipped beneath her thin mattress, fingers wrapping around the makeshift lockpick she'd fashioned from her meal utensils. Thy kingdom come. 6 minutes. In the medical bay, more guards reported symptoms. The chief examiner scratched his scales in confusion, unable to identify the cause. The ship's automated systems registered a 27% drop in security personnel efficiency. Thy will be done. 4 minutes. Dr. Chen's fingers twitched in his sleep, a final signal to Jake Morrison. The chess master had calculated this moment precisely. Maximum guard disruption would coincide with the shift change in exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. On Earth as it is in heaven. 2 minutes. Billy Tucker began to snore loudly, drawing an irritated hiss from the remaining guard. The sound covered the slight scraping noise as Madison worked on the lock mechanism of her cell. Give us this day. 1 minute. Jake Morrison sat up slowly, stretching as if waking from a troubled sleep. His eyes met those of the guard, the new one who wore his neural whip on the left. The guard nodded sympathetically, mistaking Jake's intense stare for confusion. Our daily bread. Ashley crushed her religious token against the force field. The compressed food rations, chemically altered through weeks of careful preparation, reacted exactly as her calculations predicted. The force field fluctuated, sparked, and died. All hell broke loose. Madison was through her cell door in seconds, her Parker-honed muscles launching her into the ventilation shaft above before the guard could reach for his weapon. The neural whip's arc missed her by millimeters. Multiple containment breaches detected, the ship's AI announced, its calm voice a stark contrast to the chaos erupting throughout the detention level. Jake Morrison moved with brutal efficiency. The guard's left-handed draw took exactly 1.7 seconds too long, just as Dr. Chen had predicted. The neural whip was in Jake's hands before the guard hit the floor. Security systems compromised in sections 3, 7, and 9. The AI updated as Madison disabled key junction boxes according to her mental map of the ship. Mike Thompson's spores had done their work well. Half the security force was in the medical bay, their combat effectiveness reduced to that of struggling cadets. The few who responded to the alarms found their reactions dulled, their coordination impaired. Dr. Chen calmly walked out of his deactivated cell, stepped over a groaning guard, and began accessing the security terminal with the codes he'd memorized from countless observations. Warning: environmental controls experiencing unexpected fluctuations. Billy Tucker's friendly drawl carried down the corridor as he disabled another guard with a technique that looked suspiciously like cattle wrestling. Y'all might want to sit this one out. Them plants of Mike's pack quite a wallop. Ashley Williams moved through the chaos like a ghost, applying her chemically treated tokens to force field after force field. Each barrier fell, releasing more prisoners, adding to the confusion. On the bridge, Commander Vextall stared at the security feeds in disbelief. Krital, what is happening? Krital's scales had taken on a sickly pallor. He'd been exposed to the spores too. Sir, I believe we may have miscalculated. The last security feed showed Jake Morrison standing in the detention center, neural whip in hand, surrounded by freed prisoners. He looked directly into the camera, and for the first time, the Zax Theory saw what true predators looked like when they smiled. The perfect storm had broken, and the hunters were about to become the hunted. Commander Vextel's bridge erupted in chaos as systems failed in cascading sequence. Emergency lights bathed the command center in pulsing purple, highlighting the terror on the scaled faces of his crew. Multiple breaches in all security sectors, the ship's AI reported with maddening calm. Unauthorized access detected in weapons control, life support, and primary navigation. Impossible. Vextel slammed his fist on the command console. They're primitives. How are they bypassing our security protocols? The answer came as Madison Cooper burst from a ventilation shaft directly above the bridge's auxiliary control station. Her Parker-trained body moved with fluid grace, treating the alien architecture like an urban playground. 2 guards fired neural whips at her, but she was already moving, using their own combat protocols against them. Fun fact about us primitives, she called out, vaulting over a console. We're really good at turning anything into a gym. Her foot connected with a guard's head at precisely the angle Jake had taught her. 3 decks below, Dr. Ashley Williams was conducting what she cheerfully called a practical demonstration in applied chemistry. The ship's cleaning drones, reprogrammed by Dr. Chen, spread her chemical compounds through the ventilation system with ruthless efficiency. Fascinating reaction, she mused, watching a force field generator short out in a shower of sparks. The ionic dispersion rate in your systems is remarkably predictable. A squad of guards rounded the corner, weapons raised. Behind them, Mike Thompson's specially cultivated spores wafted through the air vents. The guards' scales trembled as the neurotoxins took effect. Here's the thing about survival training. Mike's voice echoed through the corridor as the guards collapsed. Rule 1 is knowing your environment. Rule 2 is making it work for you. In the ship's central security hub, Dr. Chen sat calmly at a control terminal, his fingers dancing across alien symbols as if he'd been reading them all his life. The fascinating thing about your computer systems, he commented to an unconscious guard, is that they follow the same logical patterns as chess. Every move has a counter, every defense has a weakness. Billy Tucker had turned the cargo bay into what he called a proper rodeo. Using repurposed loading cables as lassos, he systematically rounded up groups of guards attempting to flank their positions. "Y'all got fancy weapons and spaceships," he drawled, deftly looping the cable around 2 fleeing guards. "But ain't none of you ever had to wrestle an angry bull during tornado season." Jake Morrison coordinated everything from a commandeered security station, using the ship's own communication systems to direct their assault. His SEAL training transformed the scattered human prisoners into a coordinated strike force. "Madison, you've got 3 hostiles approaching Junction 7, he called out. "Ashley, we need those force fields down in Section 4. Mike, how's our biological deterrent holding up?" "Spore concentration optimal in all primary corridors," Mike reported. "They'll live, but they won't be fighting anytime soon. Their neural network is remarkably similar to standard TCP/IP protocols," Dr. Chen added, not looking up from his terminal. "I've locked out their override capabilities. They're broadcasting a distress signal, but it's now playing Take Me Home, Country Roads on loop." Commander Vextel stumbled onto his bridge, his scales slick with sweat from the spore exposure. The scene before him defied everything he knew about primitive species. Humans moved through his ship with precise coordination, turning every system and security measure into a weapon. "Stop," he commanded, his voice cracking. "You're making a mistake. We are your superiors." Jake Morrison's voice came through every speaker on the bridge, calm and almost amused. "See, that right there is your problem. You thought technical advancement meant superiority. But while you were studying our weapons technology, you should have been studying our history." He stepped onto the bridge, neural whip in hand, flanked by his team of primitive humans. Humans didn't become Earth's apex predators because we were the strongest or fastest, Jake continued. We did it because we can turn anything into a weapon, any place into a killing ground, and any group of people into an army. He smiled, and Vextel finally understood true fear. And you just gave us a really nice playground. The Zaxtheri command bridge had transformed into a stark testament to human ingenuity. Commander Vextel sat bound in his own captain's chair, watching in mute horror as his supposedly primitive captives systematically dismantled centuries of assumed alien superiority. Dr. Chen had turned the ship's tactical display into what he called a particularly interesting endgame scenario. Holographic representations of the remaining Zaxtheri security forces blinked in red, systematically being cornered and contained throughout the vessel. Your emergency protocols follow a fascinating pattern, he commented, fingers dancing across the alien controls, like a chess player who only knows 3 opening moves: predictable and exploitable. Madison Cooper's voice crackled over the comm system. Upper deck secured. You should see what I did with their gravity controls, Jake. Turns out these maintenance shafts make excellent parkour runs when you can toggle gravity on and off. A group of guards floating helplessly past the bridge viewport emphasized her point. Ashley Williams had transformed the ship's medical bay into an improvised chemical lab. She handled alien compounds with the casual expertise of someone who'd been studying them all her life, rather than just a few weeks in captivity. Their biochemistry is remarkably sensitive to phase changes, she reported, synthesizing another batch of her force field disruptors, almost like they never considered someone might weaponize basic cleaning supplies. Mike Thompson's voice joined the channel. Hydroponics bay fully converted. Got ourselves a nice stockpile of biological deterrents. These folks really should have paid more attention to their primitive earth plants. Billy Tucker had organized the other freed prisoners into efficient strike teams, using skills that seemed completely unrelated to combat. A former locksmith was reprogramming security doors. A high school physics teacher had figured out how to overload the neural whips for maximum stunning effect. Even a retired librarian was contributing, having decoded patterns in the alien language that Dr. Chen used to access deeper system controls. Ain't it funny, Billy drawled, watching a former yoga instructor successfully subdue a guard using modified stretching techniques, how humans can turn just about anything into a fighting style. Crittle, still suffering from the effects of Mike's spores, stared at Jake Morrison with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. How? He managed to ask. You're not supposed to be capable of this. Jake smiled, the expression somehow more terrifying for its genuine warmth. See, that's the thing about humans. We're not specialized predators. We don't have the strongest claws or the sharpest teeth. What we have is something far more dangerous: adaptability. As if to emphasize his point, Madison swung down from a ceiling conduit, landing gracefully beside him. Sub-Level 3 is secure. Turn their own riot suppression systems against them. Apparently, they'd never considered someone might redirect the containment fields. Weapons vault secured, Ashley added over the comm. Though I wouldn't call these weapons anymore. More like interesting chemistry sets with remarkably volatile properties. Dr. Chen looked up from his console. I've accessed their central database. Their tactical computers are quaint. They rely entirely on pre-programmed responses. No imagination. Commander Vextel found his voice. You're still trapped here. This is one ship in a vast empire. You cannot hope to. Actually, Jake interrupted. We're not trapped. You are. He gestured to Dr. Chen's display, where the ship's navigation now showed a clear course. See, while you were watching us exercise in our cells, we were watching you. Learning your language, your protocols, your technologies. Humans are really good at pattern recognition. Madison grinned. Really good at improvising, too. Watch this. She executed a perfect backflip in the suddenly zero-gravity bridge, using the momentum to disable the last functioning security camera. And here's the real kicker, Jake continued, addressing the commander. Everything we've done, we're already teaching it to the other species you had imprisoned here. Turns out, they're pretty adaptable too, once someone shows them how to think outside their particular evolutionary boxes. The look of horror on Vextol's face deepened as he finally understood. His ship hadn't just been taken over. It had become humanity's first interstellar classroom. The captured Zaxtheri vessel hung in deep space, its exterior unchanged but its interior transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. In what was once the ship's primary combat training arena, Jake Morrison stood before an assembled crowd of freed aliens from 12 different species, conducting what he called Adaptation 101. The key isn't to be the strongest, he explained, demonstrating a simple leverage technique that could work for any body type. It's about understanding your environment and using it to your advantage. Madison Cooper swung down from the rafters, landing beside him. Like how every architectural feature is just waiting to be repurposed. She grinned at a six-limbed alien who had started using the ventilation systems as effectively as she did. See, you're getting it. In the reformed medical bay, Dr. Ashley Williams supervised what had become an impromptu science academy. Former prisoners from technically advanced species worked alongside those considered primitive, all sharing their unique perspectives on chemical interactions and biological systems. The Zaxtheri made the classic mistake, she told her diverse class. They assumed technological advancement was the only measure of intelligence. They forgot that survival itself is the mother of innovation. Mike Thompson had transformed the hydroponics bay into a comprehensive survival training facility. Every environment has resources, he explained to a group of former captives, some of whom came from worlds without plants. The trick is learning to see everything as potentially useful. Commander Vextol, under guard, but allowed to witness the proceedings, watched in mounting disbelief as his former captives systematically dismantled generations of galactic prejudice. You're creating chaos, he protested weakly. The galaxy has an order. No, Dr. Chen corrected him, looking up from where he was teaching advanced tactical analysis to a group of formerly enslaved strategists. We're creating evolution, something your empire forgot was necessary. Billy Tucker, who had proven surprisingly adept at diplomatic relations, ambled over. Funny thing about humans, he drawled. We don't much like bullies, but we love teaching folks to stand up to them. The ship's communication array, reprogrammed by their combined efforts, was broadcasting on all frequencies. Not just their victory, but their lessons. The message was being picked up by ships and stations across the sector, spreading like a virus through the carefully ordered galactic society. Jake addressed the assembled freed prisoners, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of human experience. You've all been told you're primitive, limited, meant to serve. Those are lies born of fear. We humans learned long ago that true strength isn't about dominating others. It's about adapting, teaching, and growing together. Madison demonstrated a complex maneuver that she'd modified for a species with tentacles. Every limitation is just an opportunity to innovate. Every weakness can become a strength, Ashley added, showing how a species' sensitivity to certain chemicals made them perfect for detecting environmental hazards. And every being has something to teach, Mike concluded, watching former prisoners share survival techniques from 100 different worlds. The Zaxtheri crew, now prisoners themselves, witnessed their former captives transform from slaves into teachers, warriors, and innovators. Species that had been carefully kept separate and ranked by their supposed superiority were now learning from each other, combining their unique evolutionary advantages in ways the galaxy had never seen. What happens now? Kratal asked, his voice hollow. Jake's smile was both kind and fierce. Now we take you home. And you're going to tell everyone what you learned about underestimating primitive species. Meanwhile, we'll be setting up what you might call a galactic underground railroad. No more slavery. No more fighting pits. No more superior species. He looked out at the assembled beings, former slaves transformed into pioneers of a new galactic order. Because here's the thing about humans. We never stop teaching, never stop learning, and never, ever accept chains, whether they're on us or on others. The stars seemed to shine brighter through the ship's viewport, as if bearing witness to a pivotal moment in galactic history. The day the hunters became teachers, the captives became liberators, and humanity demonstrated why adaptation, not domination, was the true mark of an advanced species. Somewhere in the galaxy, alarm bells were ringing in Empire command centers. But it was too late. The lesson had been taught, and the students were eager to share their knowledge. Evolution, as humanity had long known, was about to take an interesting turn.